will take some time.
Less than 2 weeks until the federal budget, the Prime Minister tries to convince Canadians he can deal with a trade war and a struggling economy. But the government also needs to convince opposition parties to support that budget in a confidence vote. Government House Leader Stephen McKenna joins me as the Liberal minority government faces its first major test. The Prime Minister and the U.S. President are now both in Asia, where they're likely to cross paths. Our Sunday Scrum standing by as Canada hopes to get talks back on track. It all starts now on Rosemary Barton Live. Thanks so much for joining us on this Sunday. Both Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney and U.S. President Donald Trump, as we mentioned, in Kuala Lumpur today for the ASEAN summit to pitch their Southeast Asian counterparts on trade. Trump and Carney are not scheduled to meet right now, but Carney says Canada is ready to resume negotiations with the U.S. whenever Trump returns to the table.
The government of Canada stands ready to build on the progress that we had been making in our negotiations, our discussions with our American counterparts. It is the sole responsibility of the Government of Canada to have those discussions with the United States, and it's the best way forward. And as I say, we stand ready.
Trump ended those trade talks with Canada in response to an ad out of Ontario that uses the words of Republican President Ronald Reagan to criticize Trump's signature policy, tariffs. The ad has continued running through the weekend, notably during the World Series, just last night, in fact. Ontario Premier Doug Ford says it will be pulled from U.S. networks as of tomorrow, but here's part of the ad.
And sometimes for a short while it works, but only for a short time. But over the long run, such trade barriers hurt every American worker and consumer.
On top of the end of the trade talks between the two countries, Trump also announced that he would be raising tariffs on Canada by 10%. The president didn't elaborate on when these tariffs would take effect, what they would be applied to, but suggested it was a response to what he called a dirty play by the Ontario government. Here's what Trump said before he left for Asia.
Canada, they did a crooked ad. They knew it was Ronald Reagan loved tariffs. What they did is really dishonest. And I heard they were pulling the ad. I didn't know they were putting it on a little bit more. They could have pulled it tonight.
They're going to pull it Monday.
Well, that's dirty playing. But I can play dirtier than they can, you know?
U.S. Senator Tim Kaine has put forward legislation in the U.S. Senate that would force an end to some of Trump's tariffs on Canada. If successful, the legislation would end the national emergency that Trump declared using the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA, as it's called. The legislation passed in the Senate last April when 4 Republicans broke ranks to vote alongside the Democrats. The Republican-led House of Representatives was set to vote on it, but it was never taken up. Now, Senator Tim Kaine has brought the legislation back to the Senate in an effort to revive it and keep the pressure on the White House. Tim Kaine is a U.S. Democratic senator representing Virginia. He sits on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Hello, Senator. Nice of you to make the time.
Absolutely, Rosemary.
I guess I'm going to start with what has unfolded over the past day or so, with the president now terminating all trade talks with Canada over what he says was this anti-tariff ad run by the province of Ontario in the United States. What is your reaction to that news?
Well, it's just one more example of super childish behavior by the president. The ad was a very fair ad, recounting Ronald Reagan talking about why he doesn't like tariffs. Now, tariffs have a place. Canada uses them, and so does the United States, for narrow and specific purposes. But the idea of these just sort of global tariffs on everybody with no strategy is foolish. And Ontario chose an ad featuring Ronald Reagan talking about why these kind of broad-based tariffs are foolish. And Donald Trump, who's so petulant, lets an ad make him mad and terminates negotiations. But that won't last. We have to get back to the table to talk not only about the current tariff back and forth, but even the bigger game of what do we do with USMCA, which was a Trump success from his first term in terms of finding a negotiation and improvement of it next year. So I think this is a little temper tantrum that a toddler will have, and it will blow over. But it's embarrassing for the United States that we have a president who lets an ad rattle him so deeply.
The ads are going to be paused as of Monday. They've been airing during the World Series, but they will be paused as of Monday. What do you think Canada can do to get him back to the table other than just pause those ads?
Well, I think that's smart. Pause him after the Toronto games 1 and 2 in the World Series. But Congress is acting on this next week, and then the Supreme Court the following week. So Congress next week will take up a resolution that I filed with Senator Amy Klobuchar, Rand Paul, Mark Warner, and others to terminate the Canada IEEPA tariffs. Those aren't the only tariffs against Canada. The president has imposed tariffs under something called Section 232, but the IEEPA tariffs are significant. And we're going to have a vote in Congress to terminate them. We had a vote in April on the same resolution. We got every Democrat plus 4 Republicans. But remember, that vote happened before the tariffs had bit into Americans' pocketbooks. They had just been announced. Now America has lived under these tariffs, and we've seen it hurt our small businesses, hurt our farmers, hurt prices for everyday goods, building supplies, food, medicine, energy costs are up. So I think I'm going to get more Republican votes this week to challenge these foolish tariffs against Canada. I'm also having votes on the tariffs against Brazil and the Global Liberation Day tariffs. And then the following week, the Supreme Court is going to have a hearing on a very important case about whether the president can use the IEEPA statute to impose tariffs at all. So look, the president can be petulant, but the facts and the economic chaos are sort of closing in on him. And I think that will get the president back to the table with Canada.
But in terms of what you're trying to do, are you hearing different things from Republicans now because of the impact they are feeling in their states? Are they also starting to question why the president is doing this?
Absolutely. And I think the president blow up over this ad will make them even more nervous. So when I challenged the Canadian tariffs in April, and under this IEEPA statute, you can renew your challenge every 6 months. I had a number of Republicans tell me, I see what you're doing. I generally agree tariffs are bad, but you're making a prediction that they're going to really hurt the economy. And I want to see whether that prediction bears out or not. You know, I make some predictions that turn out to be right and some that turn out to be wrong. But the tariff negative impact on the American economy, on consumer prices, on small business success, has been very, very clearly demonstrated between April and now. And so a number of the Republicans who told me, if it turns out that the economic destruction is as you suggest, I'm likely to be with you going forward. I think we will get Republican senators on this vote in October, in addition to the 4 Republicans who voted with us in April.
And do you think there's any chance the Supreme Court agrees with you that these are not powers the president has?
Yes, and to be kind of technical, Rosemary, my challenge in Congress is different than the Supreme Court challenge. My challenge in Congress is there is no emergency with Canada, none. Right. So I have to go head on. Is there an emergency with Canada, our greatest trading partner, our ally in every war since the War of 1812? Is there an emergency with Canada? And the answer to that is no. The Supreme Court case is a different one, which is even if there were an emergency, let's just accept that. Even in an emergency, does this statute give the president the right to impose tariffs? The statute does specifically allow the president to do some things if there's an emergency, but it doesn't mention tariffs. And there's a long sort of judicial tradition that if Congress is going to defer a power, delegate a power that's a congressional power, and tariffs and trade matters are, you have to be specific about that delegation. Since the IEEPA statute says nothing about tariffs, the argument before the Supreme Court is even if you accept the emergency, the president can impose tariffs once declaring it.
Let's go back to USMCA, or CUSMA, as Canada calls it right now. The negotiations, if they get restarted, are around sectoral tariffs, but the government is, hoping that CUSMA will continue. What do you think is the likelihood of that?
It has to for the good of our economies. That this is, President Trump wrongly thinks he can wield these tariffs and wield these, trade threats, and it's going to affect others and not going to affect us. Look, I live in Virginia. We export $6.6 billion a year of goods and services to Canada, $3.5 in goods, 3.1 billion in services. Canadian tourists are a huge part of the Virginia economy. This trade war is a self-inflicted wound on the American economy. So we've got to get back to the table. And remember, as you know, the USMCA or CUSMA, it was a great accomplishment of President Trump's first term. It passed in the Senate, I think it was about 90-10, and we don't get that kind of vote for a Mother's Day resolution anymore. So he should own the fact that he achieved this great breakthrough in a comprehensive trade agreement with Canada and Mexico. And yes, after 5 years, we can improve it. But it would be foolish to let an ad on TV cause him to walk away from something that truly was a Trump accomplishment.
Maybe let's just end on this. So the talks are over right now, and the last time Donald Trump did this, Canada had to pull something off the table. It was the digital services tax, which I know Democrats and Republicans both had issues with. What do you think can get him back to the table this time?
You know, I really think, Rosemary, the thing that gets him back to the table is less likely to be a Canadian negotiating move. What's going to get him back to the table is the undeniable economic reality. We had a assessment of the Virginia economy last week by 3 prominent Virginia universities, and they talked about the plummeting GDP growth in Virginia because of Trump's policies, including tariffs. And their conclusion was fewer jobs, higher prices, slower growth. That reality will cause more Republicans to vote with me against tariffs, I believe. That will factor into the Supreme Court's assessment of the wisdom of this policy. It factors into the markets. These things will get Donald Trump and his team back to the table, in my view.
Senator Tim Kaine, thank you very much for making the time. In the midst of Trump's latest tariff threat, the Carney government will deliver its first budget. That'll happen in just 9 days. The Prime Minister laying out his fiscal plan, his vision, with Canada's economy under pressure, while also trying to get some support from the opposition to pass the budget. Stephen McKinnon is the government House Leader, and he joins me in studio. Nice to see you again.
Great to be here.
I'm going to start on the news, if that's okay. And that is the news that the president has terminated trade talks after seeing this ad that the Ontario government paid for. What do you make of this decision by the president?
Well, what the Prime Minister's been very strong on with all of us since this entire process got underway is control what you can control. This is obviously not something that we can control from any point of view. So keep your head down, keep working. If you're involved in the trade discussions, stay working on the trade discussions. If you're productively occupied elsewhere on the government's agenda, keep marching forward. We have a plan, we have work to do, and keep doing the work. And the problems, obviously the Prime Minister carries a hard and a large burden in terms of those, but all of us, I think, are all pretty resolute to just keep marching down the field.
And I know you're not involved in the trade talks, so I won't belabor this too much, but has there been, to your knowledge, a conversation with the Premier to stop running the ads?
I have no idea. Here's what I will say, though. Doug Ford's on Team Canada. He's maybe our first-line center. He's been an incredible patriot. He sweats blood for his province. Obviously, we see that every day. So I'm loath to criticize Doug, there's a name for you, Rosie. Doug Ford for anything.
Do you? I imagine there's an effort to get the trade talks going again.
Well, what I can say is that these talks have advanced significantly. I think the Prime Minister has been updating Canadians on that. We are far down the road on discussions in the sectoral on the sectoral tariffs. It'll be for others to describe, that progress in greater detail.
So this isn't a setback,
but a lot of work by a lot of serious people in the United States and in Canada has happened. I don't want to diminish anything, but I do want to say that a lot of work's been done, and it's hard to imagine that work would go for naught. Okay,
I'll move on to the things you're more directly concerned with and involved in, and that is, first and foremost, getting the budget passed. So that's happening in a couple of weeks, the budget delivery anyway, not the vote. You said this past week that you're worried. What are you worried about?
Well, about math. We have a minority government. but we do believe we have a mandate to present a plan, the Prime Minister's vision of moving this country forward economically. That's what we'll be doing on November 4th. The opposition parties, if you take them at their word, what they say publicly, Mr. Poilievre has put forth a set of demands that he already knows are unattainable, and by the way, wants the deficit looked after, but wants to subtract tens, hundreds of billions of dollars of revenues from the federal government, so that's pretty hard to square. Mr. Blanchette of the Bloc Québécois, who called the budget illegitimate, coming from someone with 22 seats in a 343-seat House of Commons. That's a little rich, but called it illegitimate and said he wouldn't vote for it in both cases without having read any part of it. The Prime Minister has met with both of those leaders and the other leaders in the House of Commons. We've listened to what they've had to offer. That's good because it requires them to take stands. It'll be up to them to explain and defend those stands. But as we speak right now, we don't have the votes.
Right,
So,
but isn't that your job? Isn't it your job to find the votes and to go to those other parties and see what you can do to get their support? Isn't that what your
those
whole gig is?
those conversations are happening. The finance minister has had other conversations. I talked about the prime minister.
Yeah.
Other ministers are speaking with members of all of the opposition parties. We're getting their input.
Yeah.
But we believe we have a mandate, and at the end of the day, some hard choices are going to have to be made. The Prime Minister talks about spending less on operating expenditures in the federal government so that we can invest in things that we must invest in,
Yeah.
which is growth-producing major projects, assets across the country. That's the plan, I think, that we've been very transparent
Sure.
And very consistent on describing
Yes.
since the election. And the election was 6 months ago, so it'll be in the opposition party's hands to determine whether after 6 months of very consistent talk from this government about the challenges we face and how we propose to address them, it's on them if they wish to make this parliament fail.
Frankly, that sounds a little bit like a dare. I mean, it might be on them to make a decision on how they're going to vote, but it is on a minority government to decide if it wants to survive and to come up with a way to either get people not to show up and vote or get their support. I get what you're trying to do here, but the ball is also in your court.
Well, what I'm trying to do here is explain to Canadians that we've spoken to the opposition.
Yeah.
We've made very plain that these are the parameters in which we're willing to have discussions. We are going to have to rationalize some of the operating expenditures of the government. We are going to have to invest in our economic capacity as a country. Those will be major investments. So within that,
Yes.
what specific contributions, large and small, might you offer to the government's agenda? We've asked those questions, I think, pretty explicitly of the opposition. They will have to decide, because we are not negotiating on those principles. We'll negotiate on details,
Okay.
but we're not negotiating on principles. The principles of spend less to invest more,
Yeah.
those are principles we won't negotiate on. So the opposition parties will have to determine whether the differences between us are sufficiently large to cause the Canadians to go to the polls.
Yeah.
After 6 months.
Okay, but would
with a
you be
government-
comfortable going to the
With
polls?
a government that has a mandate,
Yes.
we believe, to put this plan into action.
But would you be comfortable going to the polls based on that?
We would be reluctant to go to the polls. We don't believe an election's necessary. We, in fact, think Canadians would rather the government get on with things, and that's what we're proposing to do. The opposition, once again, will have to decide after 6 months whether those differences are sufficiently large that they're going to have to explain to Canadians why they're causing an election at Christmas time.
Sure. I mean, you would also have to explain why you didn't put forward a budget that could get passed. I take your point, but everyone would have to bear some responsibility. You mentioned Pierre Poilievre and Yves-François Blanchet. You didn't mention the NDP, Don Davies, with a much reduced caucus. Are there any talks going on from you and your office about getting their support or potentially helping them with some of their parliamentary budget to try and get their support?
Well, I've spoken to Mr. Davies many times, as have many of my colleagues. I didn't lump them in with the other two parties because, frankly, their public commentary, their public commentary has been a little bit more constructive than the others, not ruling anything in, not ruling anything out. I have no idea what the NDP intends to do with respect to its votes on the budget. That'll obviously be up to their caucus and to their party. But again, the math is pretty clear. We don't have a majority, and if we don't have the votes, an election will occur around Christmas time in Canada.
Okay, I want to put that aside just for a moment and ask you a question just about the Prime Minister's speech around the budget, because you yourself referred to it a few times. That question that he put out there, or that appeal that he put out there to Canadians, that they had to be prepared to make sacrifices. Canadians are going through a lot right now, right? Cost of living is still an issue for many people. Cost of food is very high. What more can we reasonably ask Canadians to sacrifice right now?
Well, again, what I would say first off is that that speech contains multitudes, obviously very much in a series of speeches that this Prime Minister has given, where I think he once again very consistently laid out where he thinks the country ought to go. He did speak of, yes, we're going to need to make hard choices on the spending side, on the government operations side. We're not going to be able to do everything we would like to do there, so that we can do things that we must do on the investment side. We must make our supply chains better so that we can diversify markets away from the United States and send our products and our expertise both east and west. We're going to need to make those kinds of investments that will give a future to young people, that will build the economic capacity of this country. The great news is that there are tons of these projects. The number of projects coming forward to the government speaks to the great ingenuity of Canadians, the great enterprising spirit of Canadians. So we'll be investing massively on that side. But we will be making hard choices on the spending side. And that's the kind of budget that this Prime Minister, I think, has described since he's been sworn in.
Okay. Stephen McKinnon, nice of you to make the time. Thank you.
It's great to be here.
Ontario auto workers are also facing sacrifices following the news that automaker Stellantis has announced plans to shift vehicle production out of Ontario into the U.S. We're going to talk to the mayor of the city where that Stellantis plant, there he is, Mayor Patrick Brown, is next on Rosemary Barton Live. Ottawa has responded to news that automaker Stellantis is planning to shift production of the Jeep Compass out of Canada and into the U.S.
Stellantis had an obligation to bring back the production to the Brampton plant, and they failed that obligation. And so that's why we're putting maximum pressure on the company.
Part of that pressure includes cutting the number of vehicles the automaker can import tariff-free from the U.S. to sell in Canada by 50%. The federal government has also threatened legal action against Stellantis, suggesting its decision to move production may have violated contractual obligations. Over the last 2 years, Ottawa has given the automaker more than $100 million to retool 2 Ontario-based plants. One of those plants is based in Brampton, Ontario, and employs about 3,000 people, all jobs that are now in jeopardy following this announcement. Patrick Brown is the mayor of that city, and he joins me live now this morning. Nice to see you, Mayor.
Nice to see you.
Let's just start with the fact that there are no talks going on right now between Canada and the U.S. because of this ad, apparently, that upset the president. How concerned are you about that?
Well, I'm concerned. You know, when Stellantis announced that they were leaving town, they made it very clear they're not going to have production in Canada if there's tariffs. They were blunt to me. When I spoke to them shortly after the news release, they said there's no business case for auto jobs in Canada if there's tariffs where we're going to have a loss. And so as much as there's been some murmurs about something happening down the road, I'm not very confident at this point, and I'm worried for the 3,000 jobs that we've lost.
What do you make of the federal government seeming to believe that there is some sort of legal action that it might be able to pursue?
I fully support that recourse. I think Melanie Joly is smart to make it difficult for Stellantis to leave. I'm sure all the other automakers are watching this. I think Brampton's a bit of ground zero in protecting auto jobs. And if it's easy to leave, then others will follow. We're already seeing what's happening in Oshawa and Ingersoll. And, you know, I think it could be a very difficult period of time for the auto sector in Canada. And I would say in the case of Stellantis, you know, the precursor company received bailouts under Stephen Harper in 2009. They got land donated in 1985, and then of course in 2022 they got the money for the retooling and the production incentives. And so this is a company that is dependent on Canadian investment. The fact they think they can run and abandon all these workers and the investments the taxpayers have made is offensive. And so I think the government of Canada should hold them accountable.
Stellantis, though, is ostensibly making this decision because it feels like it has to placate, I guess, the U.S. president in some ways, right? But trying to pull things back into the United States. I mean, they are allowed to make business decisions, even if it is at our cost, to the cost of workers in your city. So what else can the federal government do to try and, or you do to try and prevent this from happening?
Well, I do believe they have legal responsibility for the funds they've accepted in 1985, 2009, and in 2022. Yeah, I know right now they're trying to placate the U.S. president. They're being bullied, and it's why I think we should push back. We shouldn't allow Canadian jobs to be bullied out of our country. Frankly, I'm sure there's foreign auto companies that are shipping champagne right now with the chaos that the Trump administration has created. It used to be that you look at streets in the GTA and across Canada, and largely they're North American-built cars. You know, if he continues to go down this road, I think you're going to see chaos that could lead to more of what we're seeing, where there's going to be limits on U.S.-made cars in Canada. It's going to be a boom for other companies around the world. It's short-term gain for long-term pain for the U.S. administration.
Let me ask you whether you agreed with Premier Ford's decision to make that ad that used the President Reagan's voice and words against sort of the President Trump. It's now going to be pulled on Monday, but what did you make of that decision?
Well, there was no hope for these auto jobs. You know, Trump was saying that it wasn't a topic of discussion. He wanted all of them. He called it friendly competition. And so, yeah, I support the Premier's approach. Sometimes you need to throw a rock in a pond to get a splash. He's got a reaction. It's got a lot of coverage. And the words are truthful. You know, despite what they're trying to spin and say that, you know, it's only a portion of the speech, Ronald Reagan viewed tariffs as taxes and would cost America in the long term. And so I'm glad our Premier had the courage to call out the U.S. president on inconsistencies.
What do you think the Prime Minister should be doing, though, to get those talks started again?
Well, a deal at any price is not a good deal. And if the deal on the table is we're going to abandon the Canadian auto sector, then we should not be involved in those talks. And we should be having conversations with other automakers around the world about building cars in Canada. And we should make it very difficult to sell U.S.-made cars in our country. We've gone along. We've tried to be nice. We've tried to placate the U.S. administration. I think, Prime Minister Carney has been very collaborative. But at some point, if we don't have a partner in these trade talks, you can't get a deal done, and you have to look at other alternatives.
Brampton Mayor Patrick Brown, always nice to see you. Thanks for making some time for me.
My pleasure.
Prime Minister is on his first official trip to Asia for a series of trade summits on the heels, of course, of that decision by the U.S. president to end talks. The Trump administration is accusing the government of Ontario of, quote, cheating with an ad of former Republican President Ronald Reagan. The Sunday Scrum is going to dive into all of that next. We're live. You're watching RBL.
The Government of Canada stands ready to build on the progress that we had been making in our negotiations, our discussions with our American counterparts.
This is a kind of propaganda against U.S. citizens. It's psyops. Why would the government of Ontario? I'm told that they have spent or were planning to spend up to $75 million on these ads to come across the U.S. border. So what was the purpose of that other than to sway public opinion?
Of course, that is some reaction to the decision by the U.S. president to terminate trade talks with Canada following that ad by Ontario, anti-tariff ad. The ad did run again over the weekend during the World Series, and it featured clips by the former Republican president, Ronald Reagan, expressing his stance on free trade. So was all of this effective? Was it a disaster? Can trade talks get back on track? Let's bring back the Sunday Scrum. Ian Bailey, a reporter for the Globe and Mail. Catherine Cullen, the host of CBC Radio's The House. And Robert Benzie is the Queen's Park bureau chief for the Toronto Star. He's in Toronto. I'm going to start with you, Robert Benzie. I don't know. Does Doug Ford believe that this worked? Does he think it backfired? Do we have a sense of where the Ontario government is now that the ad is going to be pulled and the trade talks have collapsed?
Well, I mean, the ad was effective, Rosie. I mean, I wrote the first story on this ad when it was shown to a private audience on October 8th. It hadn't been released yet, and I thought it was an effective ad, but the government of Ontario wouldn't give me a copy of it so I could look at it again to write my story. So I had to go back and watch the entire 5-minute Ronald Reagan speech from April 1987, and it is accurate. The ad's accurate. The ad quotes Mr. Reagan accurately, and it's a good reminder to a lot of people that Ronald Reagan was a free trader. He's also the guy who gave Trump the slogan, or Trump stole the slogan, "Make America Great Again," from Mr. Reagan. That was President Reagan's 1980 campaign slogan, "Let's make America great again." Mr. Reagan, as we all know in Canada, because Brian Mulroney, our prime minister, made the first free trade agreement with President Reagan back in 1988-89, that was a significant thing in our history. Our economy has improved. The American economy improved because of that deal. And I think it's interesting to me that President Trump, who his hurt feelings over this ad have magnified its impact, so that Google searches on President Reagan are up like 400%. People are talking about tariffs on Canadian products in the United States as a way that they haven't been doing for many months. So yeah, I think it was effective. It's not great that trade talks are off. It's not great that President Trump is unilaterally trying to threaten 10% increase in tariffs, but he's worried about the Supreme Court ruling that you were speaking about with Senator Tim Kaine, and I think he should be worried. I don't know that there's no emergency. There's no reason for these tariffs. It's a phony rationale. It was effective politically for Mr. Trump for a while, but the economy in the United States is sputtering. Prices are going up. And this ad was effective. If I were the Democrats, I'd be running a version of this ad throughout the next year, right up to the midterms.
Well, and you saw in the earlier hour too, BC's it's very different. It's a digital ad, but it's specific around what is happening to the cost of lumber in the United States because of Donald Trump's tariffs. It's hard to know, Catherine. Yes, to Rob's point, totally. People are talking about it in a way maybe that they hadn't in a while. But on the other hand, now we got a prime minister who can't get on the phone with the president and doesn't have any negotiating, and progress was being made.
I have a ton of respect for Rob, but I'm going to have to disagree with him here. It was effective only in the sense that it had an effect. And I think we have to say that effect is clearly not good for Canada. Did it have the desired effect? Yes, Ontario's stated purpose was actually not to influence Donald Trump. It was to influence the American public, I believe, around the question of tariffs, right? But the result, we look at it, I mean, this is bad. And I think Friday, it looked not great. It seemed like this was not a terrific situation, but we knew Mark Carney, he's got a pretty good relationship with Donald Trump, it seems. So maybe this could be smoothed over. Maybe the negotiations could be started again. But I will say this addition of 10% tariffs, and it's really not clear right now what exactly that means for Canada. I think you try to talk to people who are, in sort of some of the inner layers around these negotiations. My sense is they don't really know either, right? They always want to be very cautious. You want to see this stuff in writing. How bad is it? Is it 10% across the board? Is it 10% CUSMA only? We know that's a smaller blow. This didn't have the desired effect. I do think it's really interesting seeing the way Mark Carney and other leaders are handling this. Mark Carney over in Asia sort of talking about Doug Ford like a bit of a knucklehead, like, "Aw, shucks, Dougie, what did you do?" I do think there is something happening here where there is an effort not to hurt the Team Canada energy too much by laying blame on Doug Ford. There has been, I think, quite a lot of support of him, but you have to acknowledge that this is not a situation Canada wants to be in, and we don't really know how deep it is, but it's not good.
Yeah, I can't remember who said it now because there's been a lot of people on the show today, but someone said at least the prime minister can say if he gets in front of the president, well, it wasn't my ad, not my
Brian
idea.
Clow, I think,
yeah, Brian Clow. Okay, good. Someone was paying attention to the show. Ian, what do you think the prime minister has to do here? Because it doesn't sound like Donald Trump wants to talk to him.
Well, this is a pretty remarkable situation. Before the prime minister, this generally was a gentle ad. Donald Trump's name is never even mentioned in the ad.
Yeah.
I've never worked in advertising, but I could think of much tougher ads. It doesn't seem like an unreasonable approach to sort of make the case to the American public on tariffs using the words of Ronald Reagan. It is obviously remarkable. Anyone with a smartphone in a few minutes can go back to that speech, the text of it, or the actual speech, the whole speech, and see that the president is operating from some very flimsy logic. this all now hangs on Prime Minister Carney. We'll see where this goes in the long term, but obviously in the next few days he will encounter Donald Trump, and the pressure is on the Prime Minister, I guess. How does he approach Trump? How does he diffuse this? Whether he can, it's clear that President Trump has spoke admiringly of Prime Minister Carney. Was that fake? Has that changed? And so, like I say, the pressure is going to be on the Prime Minister to see if he can turn this around in his encounters with the President at ASEAN and obviously at APEC.
Even the president's response late Friday night there, Rob, where he said, "Oh, they're playing dirty. I can play dirtier." How do you negotiate with someone like that? I don't know what. Listen, the Prime Minister has lots of experience negotiating. Surely he has some thoughts, but I just don't know what the next move is for Canada here.
And Rosie, that's why I think this kerfuffle over the ad is overblown. There was always going to be something that would derail talks with Donald Trump, because the only thing predictable about him is his unpredictability. And I actually think this is one of those weird occasions that it helps Mark Carney. It helps Carney because he can say, look, I can't control a premier of Ontario any more than you can control the governor of California, Mr. President. There's that. I also think that it shows Canadians that this is why Canada can't get a deal, because you're dealing with someone, as Tim Kaine was saying to you earlier, Rosie, who's petulant, who's not logical. And I actually don't think the court's going to rule in his favor. And I think that the Senate's going to have a hard time in that vote that the Senator Kaine was talking about with you. It's going to be hard for Republican senators, who a lot of them are Reaganites. A lot of them are free traders privately. I've spoken to some American senators who are publicly pro-Trump, but privately want free trade with Canada. So at some point, this is going to be pushed to the forefront. And I do think this ad is an excuse. Mr. Trump initially talked about the ad saying I would have done the same thing, and then a few days later he's in a maniacal mood and he's tweeting and look, I think he's getting a lot of bad publicity over this ballroom debacle destroying the East Wing of the White House, and he's got other problems. Prices are going up in the United States. The average tariff on American goods is now 18%. It was 2% a year ago, Rosie. So prices are going up. Americans are feeling the pinch.
Last 30 seconds or so to you, Catherine. Is that what the PM's going to do, just sort of wait it out for Americans to start feeling it more?
I did think it was interesting when Brian Clouse said at this summit, Mark Carney needs to be, I'm going to use the word stalking the hallways, trying to find Donald Trump. They do have a good relationship. Mark Carney has been employing humor throughout this, joking about the Blue Jays. He's trying to take the temperature down. So I think ideally the next step is a connection between the two world leaders that helps move the conversation in a direction that benefits Canada. But we took several steps back in terms of this discussion over the last few days.
Ian, Catherine, Robert Benzie, nice to see you all. Thank you for doing this. Enjoy the rest of your day. Appreciate it. Tariffs hitting Canadian exports to the U.S. Ottawa, as we know, they were optimistic about reaching a deal on steel, aluminum, and energy. How long can Canadian industries absorb the tariff from our largest trading partner? The CEO of the Aluminum Association of Canada comes up next. U.S. President Donald Trump has now threatened to increase tariffs on Canadian goods by another 10%, so on top of the current tariffs already in place. The tariff on aluminum had been increased to 50% in June, with Donald Trump citing threats to national security. Joining me now is Jean Simard. He's the CEO of the Aluminum Association of Canada. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate you being here. We've talked a lot about steel, probably not enough about aluminum, frankly. And it did seem to me that we were close to a deal. Certainly, aluminum is a real problem for the United States. They need it from Canada. What do you make of where we're at today, Monsieur Simard?
Well, I think the last hours is more of the same never-ending story of the tariff war between the U.S. and the rest of the world. As regards aluminium, the U.S., as you mentioned, really needs our metal, whatever they say about it. We represent 70% of all their aluminium imports going into military applications, automotive sector, aerospace, and construction. It's a safe and secure source of supply. Now, when they came up with the 50% tariff back in June 4th, we started after a few weeks to shift our metal towards Europe and keep some more of it in Canada in order to avoid losses, financial losses due to the tariffs. And as we did that, well, there's so much in need of the metal that the price started to go back up in the U.S. Yeah. And today, it fully integrates the tariff in the price. So the U.S. right now is entering a phase of very highly priced metal consumption, which will be very bad for the manufacturing sector.
So basically, they've run out of reserves of aluminum, and now they're paying that tariff because they have nowhere else to get it. Is that what's happening?
Exactly. So time is on our side and pain is on their side as we move through time.
What had you been hearing about the progress on this front when it came to getting rid of the sectoral tariffs on steel and aluminum? Did you have any sense that it was coming to a close?
Not really. My understanding was that we've moved from discussions and conversations along the summer weeks all the way to a directed conversation that should have led to a full negotiation and possibly to an accelerated agreement in time, but we never reached that phase really. We never really had a common ground to be able to get to a fully negotiated solution.
So what is the concern right now for aluminum companies then? Because if it continues to be purchased, even with this incredible tariff, are you just worried that they will find other places to get it? What is the biggest concern right now?
The biggest concern is more demand destruction through time because of the full impact it will have on consumer goods as we move through the fall and winter months. The full manufacturing cycle will be absorbing the impact. Remember, Ford announced an $800 million loss due to tariffs. You do this once, you don't do it twice because basically you're not delivering the dividends to your shareholders and you're not passing on the cost to the consumers. So you cannot keep on doing that. So the pressure is building up in the US from the automotive sector and other sectors that at the end of the day cannot transfer this consumer tax to the market. And this should create the pressure required to reach a solution.
What do you think the Prime Minister should be doing right now to try and get the talks started again?
What he's been doing ever since he was elected and doing it the right way, which is maintaining the relationship and have the agility to be able to get back to the negotiation table whenever and if ever there is an opening to do so.
Jean Simard with the Aluminum Association of Canada. Merci. Thank you very much. Have a good Sunday.
My pleasure. Same to you. Bye.
We don't usually talk about sports here on Rosemary Barton Live, but sometimes the team forces me to. So with the Toronto Blue Jays and the LA Dodgers facing off in the World Series, politicians are doing what they do in a friendly bet.
If the Blue Jays win, I'll send you some of Ontario's finest maple syrup in a proper tin can.
That syrup is staying north of the border when the Dodgers win. And when they do, I'll send you a bottle of California's championship-worthy wine. And hey, can you do me a favor? Think you can put it on the liquor store shelves?
I don't think so, buddy. Talk to your friend in the Oval Office.
Game 3 is tomorrow in LA at the Dodger Stadium. World Series tied 1-1, because I know that's why you tune in to a political Sunday show. Mark Carney and Donald Trump may have a chance to meet again at the ASEAN meeting. They are also headed to South Korea for APEC later in the week, where President Trump also is expected to meet with Xi Jinping, president of China. Lots to keep an eye on that front. And baseball, too. You can do both. You can do both. Thanks for watching. I'm Rosemary Barton. Have a good day.